doesn't it just make you want to jump out of your seat, run down the aisle, waving your hand, and join the Justice Choir? Or wrong church? there was a woman in my church growing up who was always frustrated that we wouldn't call out more during the service. She knew that the praise Jesus call outs she had known from her life in the Black church wouldn't fly. So she was looking for something else to call out that would work for us. And so she tried to get everyone saying, praise justice. That could work. Praise justice. Here's the good news. You don't need to come running down the aisle waving your hand for an altar call or shout out your praises during the service, though as you are muted right now, this is a very safe time to experiment with that, so should you so desire. But you don't need to be part of the Justice Choir, because you're already in it. You're already in it. We talk about inspiring joy and justice in an imperfect world in our mission, because this is a central, perhaps the central inheritance of our religious tradition. This world, this imperfect world, full of its traumas and tragedies, this is the world we have. This is the world that we say is of ultimate importance. No other world, no other life but this life to find our meaning and purpose. And we come from a long line of people who have found a way in their lives to bend the arc in this world, who've been driven by a strange faith, not in a creed or a dogma, but in an ever-evolving love of this world. Faith in a kind of wholeness of life, an ever-widening embrace of the next horizon, both without and within. An ever-evolving love of this world. Holy are the places of memory, the places which have formed us, where we store the icons of success and shattered dreams, and gather threads and pieces of what we would become. Holy are the places of memory. You might know that we have a tradition in many congregations of offering a sermon topic to choose as part of the church auction. And today's is such a sermon. The topic is a beautiful and challenging one to me, a sermon about having pride in our religion, about the people we should remember and lift up so we might feel proud of the tradition of which we are part. And the first thing I thought of when the sermon auction winner shared this topic with me, I thought of a Sunday school lesson that one of my moms taught, still I think a bit to her chagrin. You might have heard me tell this story. It was in a curriculum about celebrating our UU history, and we learned about Joseph Priestley. Joseph Priestley is one of our scientist saints, a founder of Unitarianism in England, who we remember both for his profound scientific work and for his advocacy for the free exchange of ideas, for the right to dissent in politics and religion. A dangerous idea, one that in the 1700s brought about great persecution for him, eventually forcing him to flee a couple of times, eventually to the United States, to Pennsylvania. And the most memorable thing, though, from that Sunday school class was that he was a brilliant chemist, classifying for the first time natural gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide. And so the activity for the day was for the teacher, my mom, to name things that we can be grateful to Joseph Priestley for, like carbonated beverages. And all of us to chant in response, "Thank you, Joseph Priestley." This idea of a sermon about pride in our religion. I don't think it's exactly that sort of pride. Thank you, Joseph Priestley. But people worth remembering. It also made me think of a hymn, immediately of the hymn Rank by Rank. If you've been to an ordination or an installation of a minister at a congregation, you've likely sung this song, a hymn with all the high church pomp and ceremony that UUs can muster. These are the lyrics that were adapted by our esteemed EU minister, Carl Seberg. Rank by rank again we stand, from the four winds gathered hither. Loud the hallowed walls demand, whence we come and whither. From their stillness breaking clear, echoes wake to warn or cheer. Higher truth from saint and seer, call to us assembled here. We were gathered in by these ancients, these people who've come before, the saints and seers. Ours the year's memorial store, honored days and names we reckon. Days of comrades gone before, lives that speak and deeds that beckon. From the dreaming of the night to the labors of the day shines their everlasting light, guiding us upon our way. Though the path be hard and long, still we strive in expectation. Join we now their ageless song, one with them in aspiration, one in name, in honor one. Guard we well the crown they won. What they dreamed be ours to do. Hope their hopes and seal them true. What they dreamed be ours to do. The original version of that song, it was written by John Huntley Scrine, and it was written at the height of British imperialism at the end of the 19th century. If you know the tune, rank by rank again we stand, you know the imperial march feel to the whole thing. And I do love some of that language from our version, what they dream be ours to do. It puts me right in that Justice Choir, spanning across time and place. Ours, here and now, one little moment in a sprawling history of people sharing life's journey and celebrating many paths and doing the best they can to act and make a difference. But the history of that song also points to the complexity of this topic for me. There is indeed much to be proud of about who we are as Unitarian Universalists. But as we consider who we are and who we are becoming, who we are called to become, what the world needs us to become, we also know that we aren't there yet. We know we're still becoming. We know we're still building that new way, still working to be free. And we have some angst, I would hazard. I should own it. I have some angst. But I think we have some angst as a people about whether we're up for the task, about whether we can live into the promise of our faith. So I'm glad for the chance to lift up some names from our history, people we might take pride in, but who also might have some guiding wisdom to offer on our journey of becoming. For our becoming as individuals and as a community, it's always rooted in our being now and who we have been in the past. Ginny so eloquently shared it, put it in Maya Angelou's words, you can't really know where you're going until you know where you've been. So there's a raft of Joseph Priestleys actually in our past, highly educated white men of great privilege, who courageously, nonetheless, stood by intellectual freedom in the face of sometimes brutal consequences. Michael Cervedis comes to mind as one of them, the Spanish theologian and doctor of the 1500s, who after the printing press made the Bible widely accessible was shocked to discover that it did not contain a single mention of the Trinity, a cornerstone of the dominant theology. We might think of him as a proto-Unitarian, his ideas critiquing the Trinity, critiquing the doctrine of original sin. Generally, his interest in bringing reason to bear on scripture inspired the movements later in Poland and Transylvania that eventually took hold, that eventually had the first institutionalized Unitarian movement. In 1531, at 20 years old, he published a book on the errors of the Trinity, which drew ire both from Catholics, from the Catholic Church in power, but also from the burgeoning leaders of Reformation, from Luther and Calvin. Eventually, he was killed by Calvin. He was burned at the stake, our first Unitarian martyr. burned with his books all around him. He had to go into hiding after he wrote that first book. He concealed his identity, returned to the study of medicine, where he also made a significant discovery about the function of pulmonary circulation. So thank you, Michael Cervedis. Freedom, reason, and tolerance. These are the hallmarks that Earl Morse Wilbur, who was the first president of Starr King Seminary, saw as the features of Unitarians throughout history: freedom, reason, and tolerance. I think these are beautiful principles. They're certainly what guided Michael Cervedis's work, as well as Joseph Priestley, so many others who we think of as part of that movement of Enlightenment thinking. And yet, I actually think our most transformative figures have coupled those commitments, have drawn out of the field of possibility that freedom, reason, and tolerance created, but held fast to something less of the head and more of the heart, a faith in the abiding force of love, an alignment with joy and justice. Joseph Tuckerman was one of them. He was born in 1778, and he was a roommate at Harvard with his lifelong friend, William Ellery Channing, also the man who ended up becoming the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in Massachusetts. But Channing was who we often credit as the primary founder of Unitarianism, so a buddy of his. But Channing described him as an indifferent student. He wasn't the intellectual great that we remember Channing for. Channing said that Tuckerman had no serious view of life. 3 years he passed as a holiday. He ended up at the end of the 1700s graduating and then serving a church in Rumney Marsh, which is now Chelsea, a quiet farming village. He was there for 25 years. But what was notable about his ministry there was the pastoral care that he dedicated himself to for the sailors who would come in and out of town and the migrant families that they had. It was the seeds of that pastoral care that would eventually grow into an at-large ministry that he led in Boston, which was finally institutionalized as the Benevolent Fraternity of Unitarian Churches. Stories describe Tuckerman simply walking into the streets of Boston, particularly in the neighborhood of the docks. He introduced himself to people he identified as poor by their dress and conversation, invited them to talk with him, invited himself into their homes. He sometimes offered assistance, wood, money, or clothes. He returned again and again, establishing affection and trust. There is so many complexities, so many complicated things to say about this approach to charity, to care. And yet, Tuckerman did something profound. He treated people as if they could become anything. He, like Channing and other Unitarians, he thought about the vast potential in every person, the process of growing and becoming as an essential and divinely inspired quality of humanity. He said, there's no human being, however depraved, who is yet totally depraved. No one for whom moral efforts are not to be made as long as God shall uphold him in being. He said we would remove or enable every individual to surmount every obstacle in the way to the highest moral completeness within his attainment. It would make the hewer of wood and the drawer of water, the mere drain digger and the scavenger, morally as complete a being as it would make the most exalted minister of religion. This faith in humanity was something different than the predominant paradigm of the time. And his ministry at large, it included public advocacy for an extraordinary array of social and political reforms, way before this was a public discourse. He considered alcoholism a disease, not a moral failing. He promoted as treatment education and the regulation of excess rather than punishment. He urged the employment of school officials, the forerunners of truancy officers, to ensure children's school attendance. He urged that delinquent children not be dealt with by the courts, but on farms and in vocational training schools to be designed and established to meet their needs. He lobbied for reform of prisons, for the inclusion of educational programs in penal institutions. And for all this advocacy and work, the title he became known for was the father of American social work. Again, so many complexities, so much privilege to unpack, and yet a story to also take pride in, to know his story rings alongside so many others whose faith called them to help heal the world. So many voices in our justice choir. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use to build the common good. In the decades after Tuckerman, there was Elizabeth Palmer Peabody and her sisters Mary Tyler and Sophia Amelia, who were, among other accomplishments, were pioneers in modern educational theory. They were founders of the kindergarten movement in the United States, this idea that, again, that children are good and have been given gifts that should be nurtured and cared for as if they were plants in a garden, a kindergarten, right? We've renamed our nursery downstairs the Peabody Room in her honor, and we'll give her her full due sometime when we're back in the building. That same era, there was Lucy Stone, who worked alongside Susan B. Anthony and Katie Stanton and so many others for women's suffrage. And there was Clara Barton, who we also honor with a room named for her, angel of the battlefield in the Civil War, who founded the American Red Cross. And generations later, there were Martha and Wait Still Sharp, whose heroic lives are now documented in a film, The Two Who Dared. The Sharps risked their lives during World War II, leaving behind their children and congregation in Massachusetts to aid political dissidents and Jews fleeing the Nazis, saving hundreds of lives, smuggling people across Europe, laying the groundwork for what would become the Unitarian Service Committee. And here on the West Coast was Aurelia Reinhardt in those days, advocating for founding the United Nations, helping to host the first conference of the United Nations here in San Francisco, where the original charter was drafted, signed in the room of the congregation she served, the Unitarian congregation in Oakland, the Star King Room, in fact, named for that charismatic itinerant preacher, Thomas Starr King, credited for helping keep California in the Union, advocating against the establishment of slavery here, offering also a theology of environmental protection that still beckons. And we've only scratched the surface. So I told the auction winner, this will just have to be part one. There's so many people to remember. And I think of how many whose stories we will never know, the countless voices in the Justice Choir singing their small but necessary part, enriching the world with their lives. In times like these, our small voices can feel tiny. Even our collective voice as Unitarian Universalists can feel inadequate to the task in front of us. But I think it may have always been so. I remember that I'm part of a justice choir that's been singing for centuries, facing always, I think, the feeling of long odds. a justice choir that's been singing for centuries and will continue the song long after I am gone. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief, the Jewish Talmud instructs. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. It is good to be in the justice choir with you. May it be so, and amen. We have a special offering today to reach beyond our walls and connect with our broader community. Ginny will share a little more about it.
The basket share for today goes to the Marin Interfaith Council. Marin has been a longtime supporter of the work of the Marin Interfaith Council, or MIC. MIC is a collaborative that celebrates many faith traditions, advocates for justice, and builds communities. For over 30 years, MIC has enabled congregations, nonprofits, and individuals to make Marin more vibrant and equitable. MIC cultivates discussion of values and appreciation of different beliefs through educational and experiential programs. MIC fosters a thriving human service sector, maximizing the impact of nonprofits by connecting them with faith communities. MIC helps build respectful relations among religious groups with the goal of making Marin a national model of an inclusive community. Marin has participated in several MIC programs, including two on an ongoing basis. One, the Street Chaplaincy Tsc, which is financially sponsored by the Interfaith Council. The Street Chaplaincy's primary mission is to bring compassionate spiritual care to unsheltered and temporarily sheltered persons in Marin County, and to build community between homeless persons and non-homeless faith communities and other organizations. Two, the Sanctuary Network. In 2017, MIC began organizing faith communities to provide support to immigrant families who have a loved one who is detained or deported. This support can include advocacy, spiritual or emotional accompaniment, logistical help like food, transportation, rental assistance, and clothing, or legal observers and hospitality housing. Please give generously today to help support the good work of the Marin Interfaith Council.